I want to welcome everybody. Um, and I want to really express my gratitude for the opportunity to do this. I'd like to thank Darcy Boyano for um, believing in me and saying that this is something that might be helpful. Um, for me, on a personal level, this addresses a calling that I have and that I've had for years that quite honestly has not fully been actualized. Um, at least from my point of view. Um, I'm going to get a little bit more into that in a moment. But first, I've been asked to introduce myself, so I'll tell you a little bit about me and why I come to you here now in this way. Um, I've been a licensed marriage and family therapist for 30 plus years, in private practice for that long as well. When I started out in this field, I actually started in New Haven, Connecticut at a place called, it was called Highland Heights at the time, or St. Francis Home for Children. It was a residential facility for kids, a lot of DCF kids. Some of you may remember it. I see some heads nodding. And I was there for about 3 years and became rather quickly rose up to supervising an adolescent co-ed unit. And while adolescent co-ed may sound like an oxymoron, we attempted to make that work, and it was pretty successful. From there, I went to a place that was then called Boys Village, is now Children's Village, I believe, where I was the day program supervisor for about 3 years. At the time, I was also had been I was working on my master's at the time. I was also doing an internship at a place that was then called Meriden Wallingford Hospital. I'm not sure what they call it now, but that's where I did my internship. And about 3 years into my work at Boys Village, I received a call from the executive director of the Grove School in Madison, Connecticut, and became the director there, which at this current time, 32 years later, I'm still at the Grove School. I am no longer director. I was for 15 years. Lived on campus with my wife and kids. But there came a time to get out of the fishbowl and begin to build my own empire as opposed to helping someone else build theirs. But the place is a wonderful place. I'm still there as a therapist. You don't stay at a place for 32 years if there's not something right happening. Since that time, I have also become a clinical certified hypnotherapist. I've done my training in EMDR. I did a couple of years of training in core energetics, which is a body-based therapy as well. And I'm not going to get into too much more elaboration. Just to say, what really brings me here today is that calling. As much as I've done, there's always been a sense that there's something greater for me to do, and what that really is I'd really have this inner calling to reach as many people as possible, ultimately. But as I said earlier, it's always been my sense that there's been this gap between where I believe my potential to be and where I was operating. For one reason or another, whether it's fear, there are many reasons why it never happened, but only in the last year or so have I really begun to step back into that. And that's really what brought me here. I did a talk in Madison a few months ago that went very well, and Darcy's husband John, who I also thank, mentioned it to Darcy, and here I am. And so this is me stepping into my life, stepping into the light. I'm done hiding, and here we are. And so the topic today is EMDR, and especially as it relates to substance use disorder. I know I presented an outline. That outline I will loosely follow in the time that I have. As I went through it, I realized it was a little bit more than I had a little bit more than I could chew. So I'm really trying to narrow it down to the things that I feel are most important and to things that might inspire you. I'm assuming that some of you have EMDR training. But it's my strong belief at this time that if you're working, especially with people who have substance use issues, that EMDR and the way it deals with trauma, which, as we know, underlies a lot of substance use. I'll get more into that in a moment. That this is such a necessary skill for everybody to have. It has changed my world, and it has changed the world of hundreds of people that I've had the joy to just see incredible things happen. The way this started for me was, I was in practice about 15 years, and when it came to people with trauma, I didn't feel effective. It really felt to me like what I was giving them was not particularly helpful. And while they may have gained some insight or deepened awareness of what's going on with them, my sense was that it wasn't helping. In fact, at times it may have been making things worse. One thing I've learned about PTSD is when it comes to PTSD, logic is irrelevant. Gaining insight into one's PTSD does not significantly relieve PTSD. Yeah, it's great that people understand why what's happening is happening, why their body's reacting in the way it is. But at times it even makes them feel kind of more crazy. I had one individual who came in because their house they had a pest problem in their house, and they called in an exterminator. And somehow this guy just screwed up and poisoned everybody. They got incredibly sick, had to be hospitalized. The guy lost some of his jobs. He was an actor. They had to live in hotels. And when he came in, one of the things he said to me was, Andy, if I were to see a spider on the floor right now, I'd be up on your desk screaming. And the next sentence he said, I know it's just a spider. I used to pull their legs off when I was a kid. I know it's just a spider. Like, logically, I understand that, but my body freaks out. So that's really what we're talking about. Logic becomes irrelevant. And gaining insight into one's PTSD does not necessarily relieve the PTSD. Insight-oriented therapy, talk therapy, to me, doesn't touch it. It assumes that we are able to cognitively process information and make adaptive adjustments in our behavior. And even painful events like divorce or loss can be adaptively processed. Over time, the intensity dissipates. We sleep, we dream, we talk, we process, and it dissipates. Traumatic memory, however, is different. Excuse me. Because of how it's stored in the brain, traumatic memory is not accessible to be adaptively processed. So it stays in a full sensory state form. Gonna have to put my specs on for a second here. And what happens is it becomes, to be able to adaptively process this and to put these memories in a place where they become what we call integrated. An integrated memory is like if I said to you, finish the sentence, the wheels on the bus go round and round, right? Okay, it's there. You can pull it out if you want. You can put it back in. It doesn't affect your body in any way. It doesn't give you a panic attack. Well, unless you perhaps witness somebody getting hit by a bus or something. Actually, that's not funny. But honestly, it's an integrated memory kind of eventually fades in with all the other memories. And again, we can call on it if we need to. A traumatic memory stays in its full sensory state form. It's vivid. It's high definition. Tastes, smells, sensations stay trapped in the body on the cellular level. I'll give you some examples. One woman I was working with was processing trauma that occurred throughout her whole life with her mother. Her mother was extremely abusive, narcissistic. Punishments when even she would express her opinion or God forbid talk back, it was, a month in your room. And as she was beginning to find her voice and process through, she started to say to me, she said, Andy, I really, her mother is now in her late 80s, early 90s. Andy, I really need to be able to stand up to my mother. And as she's saying this, her jaw literally locked up. She sat there and she was in excruciating pain. I said, what's the matter? The pain was intense. And what she realized was it was her body telling her, no, you can't do that. The second she mentioned speaking back to her mother, her body reacted. Her jaw tightened and she was almost unable to speak. These are not normal memories. These are not integrated memories. I had another individual who was a victim of domestic violence. And, the image she was working with, and again, this is intense stuff. So I'm just going to warn you, let you know that this is trauma. The image that we were working with was her being held by the neck and up against the wall. And as we began processing, she found it incredibly difficult to breathe. She couldn't breathe for a moment. And these are just ways of me helping to illustrate the intensity of what can occur when trauma occurs. This is painful stuff, to put it simply. Before I continue, I want to let you know that there will be time at the end that I will give everybody if they have questions, and we'll definitely leave some time for that. If there's a question somebody has a burning desire to ask, sure, you can ask, but the preference is that we wait till the end. So when I started out in thinking about how I wanted to present this, what my intention was to do was to make clear that there's a strong link between between PTSD and substance use disorder. I eventually came to the conclusion that actually, I'll get back to that in a minute. I do want to give you a couple stats, though. I do want to give you a few stats just to say that I followed the outline. Between 25 and 75% of victims of abuse and violent trauma develop substance use disorder. 10 to 33% of survivors of accidents, illness, and natural disasters have substance use disorder. 10 to 33% of survivors, recent study of individuals with PTSD, nearly half also met this criteria. 70% of adolescents receiving drug and alcohol treatment experience childhood trauma. So the stats are kind of all over the place. I don't know how they could say between 20 and 70%, 25 and 75%. But the fact remains that trauma is often at the root of substance use disorders. And let's be honest, nightmares, flashbacks, panic attacks, poor sleep can be dampened by alcohol, opioids, painkillers, etc. This is a very Now, this is not to say, and again, I want to be clear, this is not to say that all substance use is related to trauma. And this is not to say that EMDR is a cure for substance use. I want to be real clear on that. EMDR will help to relieve the underlying trauma, that part of you that just feels, well, again, there's a lot of different pieces to what one may feel, and I'm going to go over that in a minute. I'm going to talk a little bit about what a sample session may look like, and go over some of the terms and give you a greater understanding as to how it operates. So what I want to actually turn to at this point is, and again, rather than spending an inordinate amount of time establishing a link that you already know exists, I'd rather turn my attention to what to do about this, and give you a greater understanding of the process. I have someone out there in the audience right now that I've worked with. This is a young man. He doesn't consider himself young at 30, but I do, being more than twice his age. This is a young man with great courage that has battled hard, and I'm incredibly proud of. And he agreed to talk to you all today about what his experience has been like. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Noah. How you doing, Noah?
Good, thanks. Thanks, Andy, for having me here. It's a real honor. My name's Noah Burke, and I do identify as an alcoholic with substance abuse issues. I'm sober. I've been sober for over a year now, and been working with Andy for about almost 2 years. So Andy has known me while I was still active, showing up to his, to our appointments under the influence. I actually made the call to go into a detox in his office. Andy has been extremely pivotal in my journey in sobriety. And I'm here today and honored and grateful to be here with you all to share my experience on what EMDR has done for me in my sobriety. So just like a quick background, I abused substances for a little over 10 years. I'm 30 now, as Andy said, and attempted to get sober at 23. It didn't work out at all, only lasted a couple of months, and it was very, very difficult. I was, constantly just white knuckling. It's so hard, not feeling right, thinking about substances a lot, all the time, and it just didn't last long. And fast forward to a little over a year ago, for like reasons in my life, I kind of just hit my bottom, and things were really, really, really bad for me. My business began to suffer, my emotions, and I was just at the worst time of my life. And as I said, I was working with Andy, and we talked about, treatment. And it was, he had mentioned to me, this process of EMDR, which at first I was very, very skeptical about. It seems almost silly to me, but I was very open because I had, and this was, keep in mind, this was right before going into detox, like within a month. I remember Andy had said to me, it'd be interesting to try this out. So maybe you'll have an easier time getting sober. Some of those underlying things we can tackle and try to face. So, when you come out of detox, these things aren't on top of you immediately. Because when I did get sober, a lot of the reasons why, I drank came up, and whether I was born with these substance abuse issues or whether they happened through my upbringing, like I don't know, I'm not here to pick that apart. What is the case is I do have these, I am like an alcoholic. And so I decided to do the EMDR with Andy, and we set up and he walked me through a process of that EMDR. And again, I am no professional. I am just the one on the other side that was experiencing these things. So we came up with this preface of like what that experience made me feel. And I guess I should explain, I'm going to be pretty open about my trauma with you all today, which I think is important for you all to understand, and also to show that I am able to speak about these things while not pleasant to me and not fun to like revisit. I'm no longer trapped with these feelings and emotions that plagued me for a long, long time without me really even realizing it. So I just have this sentence or this paragraph written out. So the first trauma I dealt with was a negative cognition that I am a monster. And that's my takeaway from the trauma, was that I am a monster. I can't say it better than that. And this was due to an extreme overreaction by my father to a situation with my younger sister when I was a child, of being that I now know was just innocent, like childhood curiosity. Like you've heard of, like kids playing doctor and stuff like that. Like that basically was my experience when I was a child. And my dad's reaction to this was making me feel like, I mean, it wasn't his intention. He just didn't know how to handle it. So he had threatened to like break my arms and really just he made me feel like I had done something wrong, that I was wrong for being curious. And I realized I carried this feeling of me being an absolute like monster like my entire life. And so what Andy did with me was bring me back to that moment as a child, and had me bring up a clear picture in my head of that instance, of that situation. And I really sunk into what that felt like at that moment, how wrong I felt, how gross I felt at that time. And also my father's reaction to the situation. So I had that in my head, and as we performed EMDR, I was really in those feelings, which from my side as a patient felt really important for me to be deep into those. And that can be for, that's a very vulnerable place. It's a very, I don't want to say dangerous. I just want, like, it's vital to be with someone. It's vital for me to be with Andy, which was a great support. Andy's an amazing doctor. I'll get into that. He's great at what he does. And so as we proceeded through this, I felt my thoughts. So we paused during its he wags his finger in front of you, back and back to side to side. And at first I'm like, why is like, this is very strange. But I let my guard down and was able to focus on this picture in my head that I had set up. And he would pause between the eye movements, and I would just say whatever was currently on my mind. And that changed at first. Like the specifics are very hard for me to remember of what my responses were at that time. But I remember them being at first very close to the situation of feelings like, I feel bad, my body's tense, and then kind of floating away. Um, to a to thinking about things that seemed unrelated at that time. But then those quickly came back around, and it really landed on my father's reaction and not myself of what I had done. And that's the best I'm able to explain what happened with that. But at the end of that session, I was able to, I talk with Andy about, even when I visit him, to this day, there is a black mass, like, of bad energy or bad, like, that trauma almost has a physical place in that room. That is no longer with me, and sounds very, I don't know the word, but it sounds very strange to say. But I can feel that energy there. And I can sit next to it, and just like today, I can talk about my trauma that I was made to feel. And again, my trauma was not the situation itself, but what I took away from that situation, which was very, very deep rooted in me, that I had done something wrong and I'm a monster, which I now know today, like, I am not at all. I'm a very great person. And that, relating back to substance abuse, had a huge, with substance abuse for myself, it's just running away from things and not feeling, because I didn't want to feel like that. Even though if I wasn't aware of what I was running from, I was still running. And I did my best for 10 years to use substances every day, from the moment I woke up, to escape those feelings. So using EMDR, I feel like I had a real chance, going into detox, of coming in with a cleaner slate. And I think it was really vital in my sobriety to undergo this form of treatment. And I would also like to mention that Ian and Andy touched on it as well. EMDR, this is speaking for me, was not the sole reason, I believe, why I'm sober today. It is a vital tool that I do work another program, and I have a support group in them, and I work with, Andy, and all these things are very important to the reason I'm sober today. But the opportunity that Andy gave me with EMDR had a huge, like, clearing the groundwork for me to be able to build a new life that doesn't involve substances. And, I was able to start doing the work I needed to, and not just keep putting band-aids on things, and really tackle the issue that for a while I couldn't identify. So I'm here today to hopefully encourage some people in Andy's field to look at, especially if they're involved with people with substance abuse issues, to try to either learn more about this this treatment of EMDR and practice it in the field, because I know for me it really, really gave me a good chance at so, at getting sober, and my life today is completely different because of sobriety. I'm in my own place now. I'm happy at my job. Things are absolutely amazing. And like today, the most important thing for me is to be able to show up for people, and to be here with all of you and share my story. And just to wrap up, so like I think it's proof in itself, although y'all didn't know me before today. I think it's proof in itself that if I'm able to, like, it almost seems trivial, like that I say, like, I believed I was a monster, like looking back on it, but like I really felt that. I really felt like I had done something wrong. I internalized it to the biggest degree one can, and felt that in my self-esteem and everything I did. And today I'm able to talk about that with you all specifically because of EMDR. And it's just helped me tremendously. Andy, I'd like to thank you again. You have been such a rock in my life ever since I had started working with you. You're different than anybody I've ever had to work with. I appreciate how you're also, you're very not spiritual, I guess, but like your energy is very different, and I appreciate that immensely. And it's really, thank you all for giving me this time to speak. And I hope all I can do is hope to help somebody, and I hope I did that today. So that being said, I'm grateful to be here, and thank you.
Wow.
Thank
Wow.
you.
Let me take a second, because wow.
Thank you, Noah.
Wow. I didn't know exactly what Noah was going to say, but it's choked me up a little bit. So give me a second. I wish you could have seen him the before picture, because he's amazing, and he's also helping a lot of other people along the way. And I can't say enough about it, because what I have to say about this is, you can give me all the credit in the world, but it takes you walking through the door. It takes courage to come in and dive into a big pile of shit, because that's what it is. And to know, okay, everything that I've ever wanted to avoid, not look at, not deal with, we're just going to jump right into that. What I have found is that when people get to the point where they come to me, they finally have realized they can run, but they can't hide. And that all of the different ways that they've learned to survive, all the different ways that they've learned to quell this, are just no longer effective. So Noah, again, I have such gratitude for everything you've just said, and thank you for taking the time to really be vulnerable here, in front of a bunch of people you don't know, and I can't say enough. Ooh. Noah touched upon a bunch of things that I want to bring up. What I'd like to do now is to kind of bring you through what a sample EMDR session may look like, and to give you some insights, if I could find where I wrote them down. Things that, again, these are things that I have learned along the way that, again, aren't necessarily in the books. But first thing I'll do is I'll kind of go through what a typical session may look like. So again, and I'm going to say this now, as for those of you, by the way, that are looking to get CEUs, there will be a little quiz after. And so this next piece may be on it. There are 8 phases. There are 8 phases in EMDR, And I'm not, I'm not going to delve too deeply into each phase, but essentially it's a history taking, client preparation, assessment, desensitization. That's when you begin the processing, installation, which I will say more about, body scan, closure, and reevaluation. So it's an 8-phase process. That's all you have to remember. When I meet somebody initially, the first thing I like to do is establish a connection, a relationship, get to know them. I think that goes for any form of therapy. You know, joining is a huge piece of this. People really need to feel safe. They're coming in the door in a very vulnerable place and need to feel safe, and need to feel like they're not monsters. That everything that's happened to them, and everything they've been through, you know, they're often feeling like there's no way out. Oftentimes there's this logic that I find a lot of people, and it's an understandable logic. The logic is, and it's around the hopelessness and the powerlessness that people feel who suffer with this trauma. Sorry, I gotta adjust that. The logic is, I have felt this way forever. I've had this pain forever. Nothing I have done has worked. I'm experiencing it now. I've experienced it in the past. Therefore, why should I believe that the future should not continue to be as the past and present are? And again, you can see the logic. I'll call it illogic in a way because it rules out possibility. However, what their experiences have told them is that there's no way out. And so one of the first things I do for that reason is I make absolutely no guarantees. I tell people, listen, even though I would like to, and it's never not worked. There's been struggles along the way, but I don't give guarantees because I feel like there's a point at which hope becomes a 4-letter word. One more thing that is supposed to work that isn't going to work. One more therapy, one more, and people are often, and it makes total sense. And I'll just say before I go more into this, how the session may look, that yeah, I definitely have a bias toward EMDR. There are other treatments for PTSD. And many of them are effective. The difference from my point of view is other techniques will help prepare you for when these feelings come up, different ways to deal with them, different techniques to use to get yourself centered. It could be emotional regulation techniques, different ways to look at things. And those are all phenomenal. Hold on, I want to make sure my computer's plugged in and charging. Okay, good. We don't want to go out in the middle of this. I forgot where I was. We'll back up for a second. So yeah, so when they come in, they are definitely in a place where they feel like nothing here is going to work. Someone remind me where I was, if anybody knows. Nobody knows. That's all right. I can just carry on. So in terms, yeah, actually, I just got it back. Thank you. What EMDR does that's different is when you have successfully processed the trauma, it's literally gone. Now, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Nothing will ever change what's actually happened. What's actually happened, happened. And again, that never shifts. However, the perspective that you're viewing it from shifts significantly. When you begin with what's called bilateral stimulation, that's the eye movements. It can be tapping from side to side. It can be tones going from ear to ear. When you pair this process I'm about to go over with the bilateral stimulation, the information is then accessible to be adaptively processed. Prior to that, no. And trauma is stored differently. I think it's a survival mechanism. Like so you see something happens, like poof, it gets locked in. We've all, and just to give you a small example of that is it's for similar reasons that everybody knows where they were if you were around on 9/11, where you were, who you were with, what you were wearing, what happened. And again, while that may not be at a high level of trauma by any means, it may be for some of you, if you were present, certainly. There's something about the way that the information locks in when it's traumatic. So when we begin the process of doing the eye movements and proceed, you're essentially, and again, I know that you all work for roots, so let's just use that. You pull it out by the roots. You really do. And again, it's not that you don't remember, it's just you see it totally differently. It shifts in the perspective from what you're looking at. And I think Noah did a good job of explaining that. So once I begin the assessment phase, which for me is again, essentially getting to know them, but also assessing the level of which they're able to emotionally regulate, particularly as disturbing information rises. One of the things I've learned, however, is not to necessarily fear that. Obviously, you're going to know if somebody has absolutely no ability to regulate, and you're going to want to give them some techniques. The one I use is heart math. And if you don't know it, that's a whole other topic I could talk to you about, but you can look it up. It's a phenomenal technique that helps put your body at center. It's scientifically backed. And so I want to make sure that people have the ability to emotionally regulate, particularly as they leave me and in between sessions, if a session is incomplete and things haven't come full circle, they may be left in a state where things are still undone. So I want to make sure they have the ability to do that. But what I've learned is, and again, this isn't the gospel. This isn't statistically based. This is my experience over 20 years of doing this. I've been doing this since 2004. I had the privilege of, and when I found out about what EMDR was, by the way, and I researched all these things, and no, I'm glad you brought up the skepticism, because I was skeptical too. I'm going to wave my fingers in front of someone's face, and they're going to, like, that made absolutely no sense to me. But the more I read about it, and I ordered the book, well, Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing Basic Principles and Protocols by Francine Shapiro. I'm proud to say that I read this book from cover to cover, and I don't know if I should say this, but I don't think I ever did that in any college course. I read what I had to read and did what I had to do to make sure I did okay. But this textbook captivated me in a way that I'd never been captivated before. And I thought, if this is true, phenomenal. It's like magic. And I have to mention that as well. Growing up and even as an adult, I always had a fascination with magic tricks, card tricks, illusion. This is real magic. When somebody feels that this stuff is it's like magic. And actually, I know I'm kind of going back and forth here, but that brings me to something else. I just want to read you something that I asked somebody to write, because their experience was pretty profound. This is an individual who was unfortunately exposed to a pretty gruesome scene, where there was a lot of blood. Someone who had been it was attempted murder. and he walked into a gruesome scene that he had to figure out what to do with. And he realized it was time to get help when, and again, this stuff is vivid and nasty, but as he was preparing dinner for his family and his little kids, he was slicing up some chicken, and suddenly the chicken became one of his kids' faces. And he freaked out. Again, sometimes it takes that kind of thing to realize, yeah, maybe I should seek some help. So I'm just gonna read to you.
After you read it.
Yeah. I'm going to read to you, and then I'm going to get, back to describing the process of EMDR. Again, the Andy was tremendous help, whatever, to help me overcome a recent trauma that rocked our community. However, I was very unprepared for how trauma continues to build and link to other events. And when you feel like you've moved on from those items, as I left each session, an incredible series of feelings and realizations. I'm sorry, as I went through each session, an incredible series of feelings and realizations hit me. And this is the way he described it. I like the way he described it. I like the way he described to me, actually, what it felt like in his brain. This guy's a teacher. He understands neuropsych. He could actually feel in his head tingling, and things go from the back of his brain to the front of his brain. Everybody has a different experience. He said, imagine an event of trauma is a chain link with an anchor attached to it. That trauma sinks your soul and weighs your entire being down. It gets harder to complete your daily tasks, punch in and out of work, your relationships, family, children, friends, etc., all suffer from this anchor and chain. As I came through from one particular session, I felt like that anchor and chain was severed. As it floated to the top, other past events of trauma were attached to that chain. Other anchors began to rise to the top and get filed away by my brain. These events happened as far back as high school, and I've not taken any time to remind or recall myself of those events at any time. Yet, these events all rose to the surface as one chain. Now, his negative cognition, by the way, was, and I'll tell you more about that, was I'm powerless. So anything that was in the realm of I'm powerless came up, and it shocked him. Yet these events all rose to the surface as one chain, many anchors, many weights, and my soul had to bear and not process. So these were all unprocessed things. He was unaware that were even hidden away. However, EMDR freed me from those anchors. It took each event, process any information it could from them, and then place them in a file. I was completely stunned and in shock, but happier, lighter, and more free than I'd ever been. I just started to cry as all these worries just left me. Life seemed to be renewed for me. EMDR helped me to realize that all these events were part of me, but did not define me or my worth. I did everything right that was humanly possible, and these events are only footnotes to my story. Now I am focused on raising my sons and being the best husband I can. EMDR freed me, my anchors are gone, and my boat can now rejoin the tide and sail for calmer waters and distant shores. As a therapist, doing EMDR, I get these kinds of things happen every day. Oh, maybe not every day, but a lot. And again, I'm saying this for many reasons, mostly to encourage everybody who doesn't have this training. It's a necessity. If you don't have it, get it. It takes a little tweaking and time to get it down, but you will never regret having it. So now back to where I was. After I assessed them and make sure that they have the ability to emotionally regulate. And again, what I was going to say is nothing, from my experience, nothing has ever come up. Things don't come up into our consciousness if we are not ready to manage that. I've had many sessions where you begin doing the eye movements and nothing's happening. When that happens, first thing I do is check for blocking beliefs. And I've heard things, one woman said to me, oh yeah, blocking belief is like, okay, if I go there, X may happen. There's a fear and trap. And what she said was, yeah, I imagine myself running down the street screaming. As soon as she said it, she said, it's not going to happen. And then we were able to process. If you're fearing things come up that people can't manage, I've never had it happen. They just don't come up if we're not ready for them. Again, that's just my experience. So what we start with is we assess for targets. What are the things that and you feel need to be targeted? Now, sometimes it's a one-time trauma, like the gentleman I just mentioned. And there's a lot of those people witnessing someone get hit by a train. I've had people come in who, horrific things. But so once we assess the target, which for me, I always go for the one that's most disturbing. There may be many, but let's go to the one that's most disturbing. And that's where we start. And what we start with is an image that represents the most disturbing part. Fun stuff, huh? Let's just go right to that. And so more often than not, especially in these one-time traumas, whether it's a car accident or any of the things I've mentioned before, they know it immediately. I had a woman who witnessed her son get hit by a car, and the image was him trying to get up when pretty much every bone in his body was broken. As horrific as that sounds, that's the kind of stuff that you're going to see. And that was the image that was locked in. And, she was actually jogging with him. So every time she would jog, this stuff would come up. So the image you start with, and then from the image, you go to what's called the negative cognition. And you heard Noah mention that. And the negative cognition is essentially what you've taken away from that event to believe about yourself or the world or other people. And there are a number of them. Actually, I had a wonderful exercise plan, but with 85 people, I decided to not do it. But there are things like I'm powerless, I'm shameful, I'm not good enough, I'm in danger, it's my fault, I'm a disappointment. So from that image, we extract the negative cognition, the thing that's embedded in them. For Noah, as you heard, it's I'm a monster. Once we find the negative cognition, we attempt to find a positive cognition. And the positive cognition represents what I would like to believe ideally. Ideally, I'd like to believe that this event doesn't define me. Ideally, I'd like to believe that, I'm a decent person. And so once you can, and that can often be tricky because they felt the other way for so long, it's hard for them at times to even imagine them feeling the positive. So that's why what we do next, after we find the positive cognition, we do what's called a VOC. And you're going to want to remember this because it may be on the quiz. VOC is the validity of the positive cognition. So they might say, oh, I'd like to believe I'm a great person, or that I'm at least a decent person. How valid does that feel? 0 to 7. 0 being not at all. 7 being like, this is fully integrated and this is, there's no doubt about it. And it usually starts low. That gives us something to go back to assess how we're moving. You ultimately want to get the VOC, or the validity of the cognition, up to a 7. To the point where they just say there's no doubt this is the truth. Like, as you heard Noah say, the event didn't change, his perspective shifted. He realized a lot of things as he was able to adaptively process it. His father came in and realizing, "Oh, I'm going to break your arms." And I don't think Noah mentioned it, but his father didn't talk to him for 2 months. That's horrific. And what that did to him, you've heard. So we assess the validity, and then we go to the body. Now, when I first started this, 20 years ago, I was like, do people really feel it in their body? Well, yeah. Every time I'd ask the question, I'd get an answer. So, and what I'd ask him to do is, as you think of this image and this negative cognition, where do you feel it in your body? Actually, let me just back up for 1 second because I skipped one. After I do the validity of the cognition, I ask them the question, when you imagine this event and that image, and whatever the negative cognition is, I'm a failure. What emotions are you feeling now? So you're rooted in the past and the present. And I think that's important. So what emotions am I feeling here and now? And then where do I feel it in my body? And again, I was always shocked at the fact that people were always able to say and identify the places they feel it in their body. And then I go for the SUD, and it's interesting that substance abuse disorder is SUD stands for subjective units of discomfort, and essentially it's a 0 to 10 scale of how disturbing this feels right now and here. And again, it's usually pretty high. When we start, it's usually about a 9 or a 10. However, there are cases where people will say, wow, it's like a 2, which seems weird because this is an intense thing. However, we all store these things differently. People have at times described to me many different ways that our mind and body work to shield us from these events. Some people disassociate. I've had people describe to me scene where something was happening to them and they were on the ceiling looking down, watching it, totally detached. Thank goodness. Another thing I've learned: celebrate the defenses. I always tell people when people, we think of these things as disorders. Dissociative is a disorder. Dissociative disorder. However, thank God, your body and mind knew you needed to disconnect from that. The problem becomes, as much as that might have been helpful, it's when we start jumping out of our body at times when we don't, and disconnecting when we don't want to, and being triggered to things that represent this in a way that we find ourselves leaving when we don't want to leave. So I always tell people to celebrate the defenses, thank them, shake their hand, tell them you've been useful, I appreciate you, and you can step aside. It's not something to be ashamed of. There's no shame. So once we have that all set up, we have the image, we have the negative cognition, the positive cognition, the emotion, and the sensation. Essentially what I do is I cue them up. I have them think of the image, give them time to kind of, some people don't need time, it's just there. Say the words, whatever they are. I'm a monster, I'm useless, I'm powerless. Feel the emotion and focus on where they're feeling in their body. Now, this is the time at which I begin the eye movements. Now, here's the thing: as a therapist, once you begin the eye movements, your role is to not contaminate the process. And what I mean by not contaminating the process is you let it go where it goes. And if someone says, when you start out, somebody, whatever they say, you're not commenting, you're not giving any input or feedback. You're absolutely silent, other than saying, when they're done with what they're saying, okay, basically the instructions are, the words I say is, okay, think of that. In other words, like, continue. And you establish a pace and you establish a rhythm. And you also let them know you can stop anytime you want. You are in control here. It was really hard for me at first when somebody is in excruciating pain and relating this horrific stuff. and crying, and I'm saying, okay, keep going. This is a process that, when allowed to be on its own, it's really relied on the fact that the body knows what to do. When accessed in this way, things process naturally. Again, my role is to not contaminate. So as usually, and I'll give you some examples of how some sessions start and where they can go. I had one young man, he was about 18, and he was agoraphobic. He was, this guy was, afraid to leave the house. He was cutting himself, borderline, a lot of suicidal ideation, some substance use, and his trauma was, and I see a lot of this, being bullied, particularly middle school. Oh my God, you'd be shocked how many times middle school comes up. In middle school, he was bullied, he was beaten up, he was thrown in lockers. Horrific experience. He was gay. I don't even think if he knew it at the time, but people were calling him queer, faggot, throwing him around. And his image was these kids' faces. Vivid images of these kids' faces. And when we started, he could barely even keep his eyes on my fingers. It was that difficult to go there. And it started out at a real high level. And just to kind of cut to the chase, at one point, and I believe it was just in the second session, as we began, and he's focusing on these kids' faces, and excuse the language I'm going to use, but I'm going to paraphrase, I'm going to say it directly because this is what he said. He's beginning to process this. He's looking at the image. He stops in the middle. He looks me right in the eye and he says, "Fuck them. What the fuck do 8th graders know?" Again, I don't say anything. I don't say, "Oh yeah, great. Yep. No, I just shut up, keep going." And it just got stronger and stronger to the point where he was actually up out of his chair going and pissed, going, "I'm going to live my life and feel like shit about myself because what a bunch of fucking 8th graders think. Fuck them. Fuck that. Fuck." Like, really. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, yeah, bring it. Keep going. And he did. And essentially, I see that kind of thing constantly when things, it doesn't always happen exactly like that, but there often is a turning point at some point where the perspective begins to shift. Again, what happened never changed, can't be changed. But the perspective, again, totally shifted, and he was, there were still issues to deal with, but that piece was gone, and gone for good. And that's the thing. I've had a couple circumstances where things have been successfully processed, and someone has come back. But again, rarely, if ever. One woman who was a victim of sexual assault came back after successfully completing treatment and said she was on a date and she just had a panic attack. And it turns out, as we processed, she realized that the cologne this guy was wearing was the same as the cologne of the guy who had originally attacked her. And that was it. We processed through that, and we were done. So sometimes there may be fragments and pieces left over, but very rarely if you do it properly. So at different points during the session, you circle back to, okay, when you go to image, what's there? And what happens is, and this is, I would say 100% of the time, people are often shocked and amazed that suddenly the image begins to shift. I've had people say to me, "Oh my God, it went from high definition to and Technicolor to black and white." Or, "Andy, it's like further away. Is that weird?" I'm like, "No." Or it's morphed into something different. However it shifts, it begins to fade, it begins to go into the distance. And then what they tell me at the end is I can't even conjure up that image now. It's like irrelevant. It's not even, it's totally faded. And again, I will often tell people that in the beginning, like as I'm walking them through the process, I tell them there will be times where we're going to go back and we're going to check on your image and check on the validity of your negative cognition, or VOC. And we're going to see where that's at. And to kind of, and they say, they have a hard time believing that the image could ever change. And I don't try to convince them. I just let the work speak for itself. So there are often times when a session will be incomplete, where, okay, it hasn't come around full circle. There have, things have shifted a little bit, but it's going to take a little bit more. What I have found is that with one-time single traumas, as horrific as they may be, 5 sessions, maybe 6. A one-time trauma, as horrific as it may be, is actually much easier to process than more multiple complex traumas, where things have just happened over years and years. That becomes a little more complicated, but again, same process. So when a session is incomplete, and again, that's why, again, EMDR sessions, my EMDR sessions are 90 minutes. And that's because that's how long it takes. To shorten that, to me, by the time someone gets in and we kind of get a sense of, how things were in the time between that we talked, what's come up, because I do ask them to keep there's a journal of sorts, that, again, there's an acronym for it. It's called TICES. It's, just a brief, it's kind of like taking a snapshot of the moment if something happens in between sessions, just so you can come back in and tell me what it was. It's trigger, what the trigger was, what the image is, what the cognition, what you were thinking, what the emotion was, and what the sensation was. And again, a lot of times people don't even do it, and that's fine. But so I want to make sure in between sessions they're going to be okay. And I usually follow up with a call too, just to let them know that, they need me. I make myself available 24 hours, especially as I begin with somebody, because they need to know they're safe, and they need to know there's somebody that can be there if needed. I am looking at the time, and I'm realizing that I do want to leave time for questions as well. It's about 10 after now. But I want to make sure that I'm covering all the bases. And what I really want to say here more than anything, and again, I know that many of you may already have this training. If you don't, get it. It's 2 weekends. I know they do have a like a certain, when I did it, there was no, you have to do all this other stuff. I just started doing it. Not that I'm recommending that you do that, but obviously, to have somebody who is a supervisor might be helpful. And I was a little reluctant at first, but you kind of you fall into it, you get the hang of it. And I'm telling you right now, as a therapist, while we're not in this business because we like or need reassurance or validation that what we're doing is working, my God, when these people have these moments, it is powerful. I get emotional, they get emotional. It's life-changing. And not only their life, but I'm thinking about like generational trauma. Every person we touch is also touching many other people. We help that person, the people, their descendants, their family are also being healed. And so my calling is, again, for all of you to please consider getting this form of therapy, getting it under your belt and using it well. I love it. I don't know what I'd do without it. So I think I'm going to pause there. I know there are so many other different things I can say and different things I can tell you that I get excited about, but I do want to leave time for questions if there are any. I'd love to answer them. So Feel free at this moment to chime in if you'd like. I think I just heard a cricket. I am located in Old Saybrook, Connecticut. My office that I'm in right now is right off of Main Street in Old Saybrook. I share office with my wife, Andrea, who you can see. Oh, thank you, Andrea. There I am.
Never gonna see
Again,
that.
I love talking about this stuff. There are a lot of other things that I talk about. If you need my services or, oh, my battery should not be running low. Okay, there we go. Sorry. If I blank out for some reason, I'll just go over to my wife who's in the other room and be on her computer, but that shouldn't happen. Are there any other questions? Okay, we're back to full screen here. Great. Okay, well, that's all I have for you then. Again, if you find that, I guess what I want to put out there is, if you've liked what you've heard here, I'm more than willing to talk in different places to push this. I'm more than willing to, and you're welcome. You're welcome. I see some thank you notes here.
In the chat.
You can call me. You can reach me by email. I'll be there to help you in whatever way I can, whether it's speaking to an audience or any way you can imagine. And again, I appreciate the thank yous. And
There
yeah,
are
awesome.
some
Andy,
questions
you
in
have
the
a
chat.
question. At
Oh,
what moment
I don't
did you
see-
do you see that? At what moment did you realize this was your calling?
Oh my God. This is the hard part about that is I realized this was my calling a long time before I actually began to actualize it. So I would say about 15 to 20 years. And when I say the calling it like this, talking to larger groups, spreading the word, and essentially, my goal ultimately is, easing the suffering of humanity and assisting in whatever way I can to raise the vibration of the planet. And there's a time where I wouldn't have said that. That sounds weird. Who do you think you are to raise the vibration of the planet? Well, I want to assist in that process. I want to bring people the highest level that I can, and it brings me up too, because healed. Were there other questions? I don't know why I'm not seeing them, but I'm not.
There was
What?
another one that came through that says, how do we find someone who does EMDR in Michigan?
In where?
There's a,
Michigan.
Okay, there is that's a great question. It's something I can mention. There's two places you can look up EMDRIA. It's an organization that has a listing state by state. You can find them everywhere now. And there's also just EMDR.org. That's the original site from Nancy and Shapiro, and they also have a listing broken down state by state. Great question. Thank you. I should have mentioned that. Were there any other questions that I didn't see?
Yep. Can
Yes.
this treatment be done if someone has had other treatments such as EST?
And what is ES?
Sorry,
The-
electroshock therapy.
I would assume so. I don't know, but I'd be damn willing to try. I can't imagine that it would hamper it. Honestly, I'm not sure. I've never actually, I can't say never. In more recent times, I had a woman I was working with who was kind of stuck, and we realized her medication level was so high that we needed to taper that down so that she could actually feel some of this. And it's significantly shifted things, and she's been tapering off ever since. But that's another great question. Were there others?
I'm looking, I see just a lot of thank yous to both you and Noah.
Yeah, Noah. Thank you again from me too, Noah. It's great to see some familiar faces out there too. Chauncey Allers. Yeah, I am going to say your name. I'm sorry, but it blows my mind that you're here. We go way back.
Oh, that was just a question.
It's very good to see you, my friend.
We'll talk.
Yes, we will.
Hi, Elisa. I see you too. I think actually my father might be out there too. I don't see him right now, but I think he's out there.
I think he was too.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm only seeing like one screen of people. I don't, my view is limited.
I saw somebody else with your last name other than Andrew.
That's my dad and Joanne probably. Yeah. Okay. So I thank you all for being here. I hope that what I've said has made a difference, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you,
you.
Andy. Thank you
Thanks,
so
Andy.
much. Take
Thanks,
care of
Andrew.
yourselves.
Noah.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Noah.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me be here.
Amen.
Thank you. Mhm.
And thank you, Darcy,
Thank you,
for
Eli.
bringing me here. I really am grateful.
You're very welcome, Andy.
Oh, I think he just lost him.
I think so too.
Um,
Take care, Andrea.
And Andrew, are you still there?
Up?
Yeah.
She's here.
Can
Coming in
you
here.
can you take my number down, my friend?
Yes. Give me it.
203
Yep.
644
Okay.
8908.
8908. Yeah, great to see you. I hope you're still playing soccer, because I
Oh, I
remember
am.
you were a soccer player.
I play as
All
much.
right.
I play soccer and golf, but yeah, enjoy your day. I would love to chat someday. So let me know.
Well, we definitely will. Thank you.
All right, Andrew. Thank you, man.
So long. Hi. Hi and goodbye. You guys are great.
Oh.
All right. We'll talk soon, Andy. I love you. Thank you for letting me help out with this.
You were phenomenal, and I'm incredibly grateful for you just putting yourself out there, man. You nailed it. You nailed it.
Thank you, brother.
Another
Thank you.
chance.
I'm grateful
Excuse
to
me,
be
can you
here.
guys tell us? Thanks again for your share.
Bye, you guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
See you, Darcy.
See you later.